lot of lawmakers calling for change following that tragedy now in Tucson. Congresswoman Louise Slaughter, she's from New York, she says it shows the FCC should regulate rhetoric.
Everybody owns the airwaves, television and radio. They are owned by the people of the United States, and as a condition of licensing, they are overseen by the FCC. Which is what that says to me is that either the FCC is not working anymore and the Justice Department's background checks are of no use.
But are lawmakers using the tragedy to promote their own political agenda? To find out what Americans are saying, we're joined by our Radio Rumble from Washington, D.C., Tom Hartman. From Minneapolis, the author of Power Divided is Power Checked, Jason Lewis. And from Miami, the author of Consciousness Equity, Neal Asbury. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, Tom, let me start with you. You heard the Congresswoman. What do you think about it?
I don't think that you can limit opinion radio or television. I think it's entirely appropriate that we have a wide spectrum of diversity and opinions on radio and television. And, you know, that's the American way, frankly.
Well, I'm glad to hear that from you. I assume that the other two gentlemen agree, right? Jason, Neal?
Well, look, this has been an agenda on the part of some in Congress for quite some time. But if you look at American history, really, in the span of 18 years, we lost President Kennedy, his brother, Martin Luther King was shot, Reagan was shot, Gerald Ford was fired upon at close range. All the while, we had the Fairness Doctrine. So there's absolutely no empirical evidence to suggest that some sort of government de facto censorship would restrain violence.
Neal?
Well, it sounds to me like she's creating her own enemy list. I mean, this is sheer demagoguery. I mean, this is only targeted at those that she disagrees with. Is she going to go after Paul Krugman and the New York Times for their climate of hate piece that only promotes hate? Is she going to go after President Obama for his speech that if they bring knives, we bring guns? I mean, these martial metaphors have been around in American culture for many, many years, and they're going to continue to be here. We have plenty of laws to go after the bad guys. Let's not trample our Constitution, and let's leave all the good people alone.
Well, then we had the sheriff down in the Tucson area, Dupnick, who immediately, instead of talking about the investigative nature of the crimes that happened there on Saturday, he talked about the political, well, his political personal feelings. And now it turns out that this had nothing to do with politics, what happened there. So, Tom, what does that say about the culture in which we find ourselves?
Well, I think in a certain way it actually does have something to do with politics, but not in that direct route. We have, since the 1980s, seen a drastic cut in social services and health services to the mentally ill, and we've seen in Arizona in particular that it's a whole lot easier to get a gun with a 30-shot clip in it, where it used to be up until 2004
yeah, but Tom, he didn't even
of 10.
apparently go to get mental health, so I don't even know if those cuts apply.
That's my point. If it was widely available to people regardless of their income, as it was at one time in this country, I think it's more likely when, after his school 4 times said to him, you got to go see a shrink before you come into this school, that he might have. So I think that that's really probably the larger issue here, and that, frankly, has become tragically a political issue. Trying to roll back Obamacare is rolling back health care.
In this discussion, because Jason, this sheriff basically pointed the finger at the conservative movement in this country and said it's your fault.
Well, it is true, and it's an outrageous abuse of his position. In fact, if I were the prosecuting authorities down there, I would have considered a gag order on this guy. He's trying to taint the jury pool, for crying out loud. I've never seen anything like this from a law enforcement officer at a press conference in the wake of a shooting in my life, so it was the height of irresponsibility. You know, Tom said something interesting, though, with regard to mental health, and my old friend is half right, as usual. The rise of these privacy laws is really what's hindering some of this.
Exactly.
Schools can't release any information. There's no such thing as, for all practical means and purposes, civil commitment anymore. So it's not a lack of resources. It's the fact that groups, usually on the left, have sort of hamstrung the authorities' abilities to get a handle on some of these rather disturbed characters.
The special interests have taken control. We spoke about that on the show yesterday. Great point. Neal, I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, it's hard to imagine a tragedy of this magnitude being any worse than it already is. This was a crime against the American people. This is a time that we should all be united in our grief, in our mourning, in our healing process.
Right.
The sheriff is a man of law. He's a man of facts.
Right.
So how can he say such terrible, stupid things?
Right.
It's unbelievable.
It's indescribable.
It really does trivialize
All right, I
the
got to go,
tragedy.
guys. I got to go. But to the three gentlemen, thanks very much. And you'll have lots of
Thank you,
listeners
Gretchen.
today, no doubt.